They taught me silence before they taught me love. In a house full of voices, mine had the weight of a whisper, light enough to float, too light to land. I learned to read the room the way some children learn to read books. My mother's eyes moved past me toward the child who demanded more. My father's praise circled the son who copied his walk. My sister dressed in attention that fit her like a custom gown. When I spoke, someone laughed. When I asked, someone else received. I learned to keep score without a scoreboard, to keep breathing without taking up space. Neglect does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with small edits to the truth. Your birthday is not forgotten. It is lost in the rush. Your win is not ignored. It is not a big deal. Your tears are not dismissed. They are too sensitive. Each tiny cut heals without a scar, but the skin grows thin. People tell you to be grateful. People tell you to be patient. People tell you that family is everything. I believed them until belief felt like a trick. I trained myself to be useful, because usefulness buys minutes of attention. I cleaned the plates before anyone stood up. I memorized bills and dates. I fixed the light over the back door when it flickered. I learned where the documents lived, which drawer stuck in summer, which shelf hid the folder with the faded clip. I learned that a quiet girl with answers is good to have around and easy to forget once the answer is given. A tool lives in the box until someone needs it. Then it goes back in the dark. On my 17th birthday, I came home to an empty table. My brother had a work thing. My sister had a late class. My parents were exhausted. I cut an apple with a dull knife and told myself I did not care. I placed the slices like petals around a cup of tea and ate in silence. That night I wrote a sentence on a scrap of paper and hid it under my mattress. I will become impossible to overlook. It was not a scream. It was a plan. I started with small shifts that no one noticed. I took the late shift at the pharmacy and saved every tip in an envelope with my name on it. I taught myself to write letters that people read twice. I watched courtroom videos at night, not for drama, but for rhythm. The way the truth sits still while lies move too much. The way a date can cut through a story like a blade. The way a single clause can turn a promise into a trap. I did not tell anyone what I watched. I did not announce my new habits. Announcements die in my house. Work survives. At home I remained the background. The family celebrated my brother's car and my sister's internship. My father called me helpful. My mother called me sweet. The words fell like crumbs from a table I set myself. I smiled and passed the salt. I hugged when they needed softness. I stayed quiet when they needed a wall. I kept my sleeves down and my eyes open. The first fracture in our family glass did not look like a fracture. It looked like a property discussion between my father and his cousin, a conversation everyone considered boring. The papers stayed on the dining table for a week. People moved them to eat and moved them back to avoid a stain. I read them every night, 5 minutes at a time, while I cleared plates and folded napkins. The language was dry, but dry words can hide fire. I saw dates that did not line up. I saw a signature copied from an old sheet. I saw a clause that would move a boundary line if no one objected within a set period. No one planned to object. No one read the line. I went to the public office on my day off and asked for copies. I did not announce a mission. I asked like a curious girl who did not want trouble. I paid the small fee. I compared the copies with the papers on the table. The differences were not accidents. They were choices. I understood that my father trusted the cousin, and trust is a door without a lock. But I also understood that trust without proof is an invitation for theft. I placed the copies in a plastic sleeve and slid them into a notebook under my bed. When I tried to warn my father with a question, he waved me away with tired affection. He said I worried too much. He said family does not cheat family. He said I should focus on my studies. I nodded and took the plates. I learned something important that day. Love can blind a person to the shape of a knife. My father loved the story of loyalty more than he loved the work of checking a fact. Stories feel warm, facts feel cold, but cold keeps food safe. I began to prepare for a day no one else believed in. I asked an older pharmacist about a lawyer who did not waste words. He gave me a name. I visited her office once, sitting on a chair that made a squeak when I shifted. I showed her the copies and the original sheets I had access to for one night while everyone slept. She did not smile. She did not frown. She drew a small square around a date and said, "This will matter." She told me to keep the copies safe and keep my mouth shut until the moment arrived. She told me that people who ignore you will underestimate you twice, before the fight and during it. I went home and made dinner like any other day. I watched my family laugh in the blue light of the television. I washed the bowls in water that stung my hands. I counted the days left on the clause. I tucked my hair behind my ear and let the plan settle deeper. When the moment came, It arrived with 3 knocks on my door. My father stood in the hall with a face I had never seen on him. The cousin had filed a claim. The boundary had shifted without our consent. The house line on the map had moved as if the ground had obeyed a pen. A hearing date sat on a folded notice like a dare. My father asked if I had seen the papers he left on the table that week. He asked with a voice that tried to stay calm and failed. I did not answer right away. I watched the man who taught me to ride a bike search my face for a quick solution. I felt the old reflex rise in me, the urge to forgive the years and save the day. It met the quiet sentence hidden under my mattress. I will become impossible to overlook. I heard both at once. I chose the sentence. I told him I had copies. I told him there were differences that could break the cousin's claim if we moved with precision. I told him there was a lawyer who had seen what I saw. He looked relieved and then confused, because my words did not apologize for existing. They set terms. We would follow my plan. We would meet my lawyer. We would keep our mouths shut about the copies until the hearing. He nodded because he needed me. Need sharpens respect the way hunger sharpens smell. In the days that followed, my mother began to speak to me in a new tone. It was soft and deliberate, like a person learning a language late in life. My brother offered to drive me to work. My sister placed a hand on my shoulder when she asked about my day. Attention poured in like rain after a dry season, and I understood that rain can flood a house that never fixed its roof. I kept my distance without making a scene. I did not punish them with rudeness. I punished them with boundaries. At the hearing I spoke only when needed. I placed the copies on the table at the exact moment the cousin's lawyer tried to turn a half-truth into a whole. The judge leaned forward. The cousin leaned back. My father looked at me as if he had discovered a door in a wall he had walked past for years. I felt no triumph. Not yet. The process had begun. The tide had shifted by inches, not miles, but inches can move a body out of deep water. We left the building through a side exit to avoid curious neighbors. In the car, my father started to thank me, but the words fell apart. Gratitude is hard when it stands next to guilt. I did not soothe him. I did not fill the silence to make it easier for him. I let the quiet sit like a third passenger between us. I thought of my 17th birthday and the apple slices on a plate. I thought of the plan written in my own hand. I thought of the girl who learned to be useful because it was safer than asking to be seen. That night I did something I had never done. I locked my door, not out of fear, but out of choice. I took the sentence from under my mattress and held it to the light. I wrote a second line below it. I will choose myself even when they need me. The first line kept me from vanishing. The second would keep me from drowning in their sudden attention. Here is what I know now. Families can shape you into a tool or into a ghost. If you let them, they will use you or forget you as it suits the day. But if you teach yourself the weight of your own name, if you learn the map of the truth and the rhythm of patience, you can change the angle of the room. The day will come when they knock, and you will decide how wide the door opens. I had just opened mine by an inch. I already knew I would not open it all the way. Not yet. Not after the years they left me outside. The next move would not be loud. It would be exact. It would be the moment when every small cut in my past met the sharp edge of a fact. I would give them what they gave me, but cleaner. They had trained me for this without knowing it. I would not shout. I would not beg. I would not disappear. I would make them see me, and I would make them feel the cold. I remember the day I realized silence was no longer enough. Until then, I had carried the weight of being ignored like a heavy coat I could never take off. It was uncomfortable, but it was familiar. That day, however, something inside me cracked in a way that could not be patched over. It began with a phone call. I was sick, so sick I could barely lift my head from the pillow. My body burned with fever, my skin sticky with sweat, the room spinning every time I tried to stand. I picked up my phone, hands trembling, and dialed my mother. My voice shook as I asked her to come home early, just for a little while, just to bring me medicine. She sighed as if I had asked her to lift the world. She told me she was busy, that my brother needed her more, that I was strong enough to manage. Then she hung up. The click on the line echoed louder than her words. It was the sound of abandonment, sharp and final. I remember staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the fan moving above me, and feeling a rage that was hotter than the fever itself. I knew then that if I collapsed on that bed and never woke up, they would mourn me for a week, then return to their lives as if nothing had been missing. I was not a daughter to them. I was an afterthought. Later that year, I tried again, not with illness, but with ambition. I had won a local essay competition, something that mattered deeply to me. The prize was small, a certificate and a modest scholarship, but it felt like proof that I could carve my own space in the world. I came home with the paper in my hands, my heart beating faster as I imagined a spark of pride in their eyes. I laid the certificate on the kitchen counter while my mother cooked and waited for her reaction. She glanced at it once, shrugged, and said, "That is nice, but your sister just got into her dream internship. That is something worth celebrating." My father came in later, saw the paper, and asked me if it was for participation. When I told him it was first place, he chuckled like I was exaggerating. My brother passed by without even looking at it. I folded the certificate carefully and placed it in a drawer. That night I lay in bed, staring at the same ceiling, and swore to myself that one day they would hold proof in their hands they could not ignore. The breaking point did not arrive in a single blow. It was death by 1,000 dismissals. I asked my father once to teach me how to manage a bank account. He waved me away, saying my brother needed to learn first because he would handle the family's money someday. I asked my mother if she could help me buy books for college. She told me to borrow from friends because my sister needed new clothes for her internship. I asked my brother if he could drop me off at an interview. He said his car was too precious to waste gas on my small dreams. Each refusal dug deeper into me. Each dismissal sharpened my silence into something harder, colder. I stopped expecting help. I stopped expecting love. But I never stopped watching. Never stopped remembering. One evening stands out in sharp relief. I had been saving money for months to apply for a course that could change my future. The deadline loomed, and I was short by just a small amount. I gathered my courage and asked my father for a loan, promising to pay him back with my own wages. He looked at me with annoyance, then handed the cash to my brother instead, telling him to buy tickets for a concert with his friends. The message was clear. My dreams were less valuable than his entertainment. I went back to my room that night and wept into the pillow until the fabric was soaked. But beneath the tears, a vow formed, sharp and unyielding. I whispered it into the darkness so softly that only I could hear. They will regret this. Every dismissal, every moment they chose someone else over me, every time they pretended I did not exist, I will make them remember. From that day on, my desperation turned into fuel. I still asked them for help sometimes, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to watch them fail me again. Each rejection was a reminder, each refusal another brick in the wall I was building between us. I learned to stop showing disappointment on my face. Instead, I smiled and thanked them while I stored the hurt away like a weapon waiting for its time. I began to imagine scenes of the future, not childish fantasies of running away, but calculated visions of power. I pictured them standing in a room where my voice could not be drowned, where my proof could not be dismissed, where they would have no choice but to see me. I pictured their eyes widening with regret, their mouths fumbling for excuses, their hands reaching for me not with love but with need. And I pictured myself, calm and unbending, giving them nothing more than what they had given me, silence. The loneliness never left me. Nights were long, and I often curled up with the ache of being unwanted. But inside that ache lived something alive, something burning. I learned that loneliness, if fed with enough betrayal, becomes anger, and anger, when sharpened, becomes resolve. I carried that resolve like a hidden blade, invisible to them, but cutting me into the person I was becoming. By the time I reached adulthood, I no longer asked them for anything, but the vow remained. The day would come when they would need me, when the balance of power would tilt, and when it did, I would not hesitate. I would not forgive. I would not forget. They thought they had broken me with their indifference. What they did not know was that they had built me instead. Every time they turned their backs, they were carving the shape of the woman I would become, silent, patient, and ready to strike when the moment arrived. And I promised myself, again and again, that when that moment came, I would not waste it. They came to me with the kind of faces people wear when they are running out of options. I had watched those faces at birthdays and weddings, framed in smiles that did not reach their eyes. Now the smiles were gone. My father's hands were trembling when he handed me the folded notice, and the cousin's name on it felt like a cut through a dried seam. A claim had been filed that could take half of what our family owned. A boundary line redrawn by ink and a signature. A single paragraph that, if accepted, would push my childhood home into another person's name. They had lived for years as if the house belonged to a story that never changed. Papers sat like ornaments on the table. Decisions were made with a shrug and a handshake. They assumed loyalty was automatic. They assumed I would remain small and useful, the quiet force who picked up the pieces. Those assumptions had been the mistake that gave me time to learn, time to watch, time to collect proof the way others collect memories. When my father asked me to read the claim aloud, his voice broke on the last word. I read it slowly, tasting each date. The cousin's lawyer had dotted a web of documents across 3 offices and called it a correction. The correction would erase years of our family's recorded boundaries if no one opposed within 30 days. I looked at my family and saw the disbelief bloom into panic. They began to speak at once, a tangle of advice and accusation, but the sound of them pressing against each other only made the hollow in the room louder. I had not planned to be the one who would move first. I had kept my lawyer's number folded in my phone like an ember I could strike if needed. The ember had warmed into something hotter now. I offered the name, and the room stilled. My father's relief was a soft exhale, as if someone had finally closed a door he had been propping open for too long. They needed me, and the need cleaned the air between us in a way neither kindness nor anger ever had. Meeting my lawyer for the first time had been quiet and practical. She did not indulge in dramatic promises. She asked for copies, dates, witnesses, phone records. She squinted at a clause and circled a line with a pen. She said the cousin would rely on small errors and the assumption that no one would challenge paperwork glossed over by haste. She told me that the difference between losing everything and keeping it could be a single signature, an eyewitness, or a notarized note filed years ago and forgotten. She said, in her clipped way, that I had things she wanted to see. Going through the documents in the dim light of my room felt like assembling a map. I spread photocopies like cards on a table and traced the history of our ownership in dates and initials. I found the tiny shifts I had suspected, a line added here, a date changed there, a witness name replaced by a cousin who rarely visited. Each alteration was a footnote in a private theft. I felt a cold satisfaction in the clarity of it. Evidence made abstract hurt into something that could stand at a bench and speak. The house changed around us. People who had once taken my help now hovered like guests unsure of how to sit. My mother hovered in doorways, carrying plates with hands that trembled. My brother paced the garden and replayed conversations like someone trying to memorize a new language overnight. They tried to wrap themselves in urgency, thinking haste might fix a mistake. Haste is a poor substitute for proof. We called witnesses. I rang an old neighbor who had watched our family for decades. She remembered the boundary markers that had stood for 50 years. She remembered my grandfather planting the sapling that marked the corner of our land. She had photographs with dates stamped on the back. She had a voice that carried calm like a lighthouse. She agreed to write a statement and to come to court. The cousins' camp had more than ink. They had friends who could testify to a friendly correction. They had a lawyer who loved to fill the air with legal jargon, and they had a willingness to exploit the fact that my family's attention had been scattered for years. They started a whisper campaign in the neighborhood, small lies stitched into larger assumptions. People began to question whether the land border had always been as our deed suggested. I watched the rumor spread and felt the old anger slide back into me, bending into a new resolve. At the law office, papers multiplied. My lawyer taught me how to file an objection and how to request a stay during the challenge. She showed me the exact phrasing that closed loopholes and the tone that the judge favored, direct, factual, emotionally neutral. I learned to write with the same precision I had used to balance my savings. My notes became evidence. My silence at family gatherings became preparation. When the hearing date arrived, I walked into the room with a small file in my hand and a steady breath. The courtroom smelled of varnish and old books, like a library that had learned to keep secrets. My family sat behind me, a cluster of faces I had loved and resented in equal measure. The cousin sat confident, flanked by a lawyer who spoke in a tempo meant to fill the room. I felt my father's fingers on my shoulder for a moment, an instinctive plea masked as support. The cousin's lawyer spoke first, painting a story of clerical correction. He used smooth phrases and a cadence meant to lull. The judge nodded, the clerk recorded, and the room leaned toward the sound. I sat still until the counsel finished. Then my lawyer rose and placed the copies I had prepared on the table like a set of small arrests. She did not shout. She did not call names. She presented dates, notarized letters, a photograph of my grandfather standing by the sapling, and a neighbor's testimony with a stamped date. Each item was a peg in a frame that left the cousin's story hanging without support. Witnesses rose and gave simple accounts. The neighbor spoke with a memory that refused to be hurried. She recited dates and described men who visited the border and men who never did. I watched my family's faces while the witness spoke, and I saw guilt and disbelief and, finally, relief. The cousin's confident smile faltered. Evidence does something strange to arrogance. It makes it small. After the session, people lingered in the courthouse hallway, trading opinions and predictions. My father found me near the steps and tried to clasp my hand like a man who wanted to fold time back into its earlier shape. He murmured thanks so low I almost missed it. My mother's eyes shone with an unfamiliar softness. My brother stood a little straighter. I felt the power of the moment not as triumph but as the slow turn of a gear. The claim had been paused, not ended. The cousin could appeal. The court could find a path to a different outcome. The law is patient and can be cruel in its own rhythm. Back home, the balance had shifted enough to change how they looked at me. They treated me like a vessel that could hold answers, and for a breath I allowed it. I did not pretend their gratitude would heal the years. I accepted their thanks because it was a practical thing, like accepting a receipt. I kept my boundaries and my plans. I continued to meet my lawyer and to file motions, each step a measured hinge. I did not let relief become softness. Late at night I would sit at the window and consider the strange economics of being needed. It was a currency my family had never used with me. Now they had taken it up like a habit. I thought of the nights I had slept hungry for attention and the mornings I had risen to silence. I thought of the ember I had kept in my pocket, the lawyer's name, the copies under my bed. The opportunity for revenge had arrived not because I wished harm but because I had learned to prepare. I had learned to convert years of being invisible into leverage that could be wielded without malice. There was a quiet understanding growing inside me that this fight was not only about land and paper. It was about the right to be seen and the right to be treated as someone whose voice matters. It was about the inconvenient fact that the person who had been useful for years could also be the person the family needed when the ground shifted. They had assumed I would make the easy choice and step aside. They had assumed I would prefer peace over proof. They were wrong. I would give them the choice now, on terms they had not set. I would press the facts until the walls could not ignore the cracks. I would make them confront what they had done by showing what I had kept. The moment for payback had been handed to me by negligence and greed. I would use it with exactness. The morning of the full hearing arrived with a weight that pressed against my chest. The courthouse stood like a monument carved from stone and judgment, its steps wide enough to make anyone feel small. My family walked ahead of me in a cluster, their voices low and hurried, their clothes chosen to project respectability. I followed with the file clutched in my hand, my steps steady, my mind sharper than it had ever been. The corridor outside the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Neighbors, distant relatives, and curious onlookers had gathered, their eyes darting between me and my cousin's camp. For years, these same people had seen me as the quiet girl in the background, the one who poured tea at family functions. Now they watched me with curiosity, sensing the shift in the balance of power. When we entered the courtroom, the air thickened. The cousin sat with his lawyer, a man whose voice carried like a drumbeat. They had dressed for victory, polished shoes, sharp ties, an air of smug certainty. My father sat beside me, shoulders heavy, his face carved with regret. My mother gripped a rosary she had not touched in years. My brother and sister fidgeted, their confidence drained into anxious glances. I was the only one who sat still. The judge entered, and silence swept through the room. His gavel struck once, a sound that sliced through the whispers. The cousin's lawyer rose immediately, launching into a performance that dripped with rehearsed conviction. He painted his client as a man seeking fairness, correcting a clerical oversight that had long burdened the property line. He spoke of loyalty, family bonds, and the importance of respecting agreements. His words rolled like polished stones, smooth but heavy. I listened without blinking. His story was crafted with precision, but I knew what lay beneath. Every sentence was a mask. Every phrase was a curtain hiding deceit. When he finished, the room leaned toward him, nodding in agreement. My family looked smaller, their heads bowed. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, her movements measured, her voice low but cutting. She began not with drama, but with dates and documents. She laid out copies, each one aligned with the precision of a blade. She read aloud clauses that contradicted the cousin's claims. The room shifted. People leaned forward. The cousin's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. I had prepared for this moment for years. When my lawyer signaled, I rose and walked to the witness stand. My palms were dry. My heartbeat was steady. I had lived through silence and dismissal. This was not fear. This was truth finally given a voice. I took the oath, my hand firm, and faced the room. The cousin avoided my eyes. His lawyer smirked, expecting me to falter. The judge asked me to explain my role in the documents, and I began. I told the court about the week the papers sat on our dining table, ignored by everyone but me. I described the inconsistencies I found, the copied signatures, the altered dates. I explained how I had obtained certified copies from the public office, How I had compared them line by line. I produced the photographs from the neighbor, the dated evidence that the sapling planted by my grandfather had always marked the boundary. The cousin's lawyer pounced. He asked why I, a young woman with no formal training, would have noticed these details. He mocked my silence in the family, insinuating that I had fabricated my evidence for attention. His words echoed the dismissals I had endured all my life. For a moment, I felt the sting of every insult, every time I had been told I was invisible, but I had learned to turn pain into resolve. I met his gaze and answered calmly. I was ignored, yes, which gave me the time to observe what others overlooked. Silence can sharpen the eyes. You may mock me, but the documents do not lie, the dates do not lie, the signatures do not lie, and the truth will not vanish because you choose to insult me. The courtroom stirred. People whispered. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying me with a new interest. The cousin's lawyer pressed harder, throwing accusation after accusation, but I parried each with fact. Every time he tried to twist my words, I returned to the evidence, dates, clauses, witnesses, proof. He raised his voice, but I never raised mine. The louder he became, the smaller he looked. Then came the witnesses. The neighbor testified with unwavering clarity. She described my grandfather's sapling, the stone markers, the years of history everyone in the neighborhood remembered. She held up photographs with dates stamped in the corner, proof that no clever story could erase. Her voice rang with certainty, and I felt the tide turn. The cousin tried to recover. He took the stand, his lawyer guiding him with carefully phrased questions. He spoke of family loyalty, of being misunderstood, of only wanting fairness. He looked at the judge with practiced sincerity, his voice cracking at just the right moment. My mother wept quietly, torn between old bonds and the evidence unraveling before her. Then my lawyer rose for cross-examination. She asked him about the dates on the documents. He stumbled. She asked about the witness names. He hesitated. She asked about the cousin whose signature appeared on papers filed when he was abroad. The room gasped. He stammered, his facade cracking like thin ice. I watched him falter and felt no pity. This was the man who had gambled with our home, who had expected silence to cover his theft. I had been silent too long. Now my silence was his undoing. As the hours passed, the courtroom became a battlefield. Lawyers clashed with words sharper than swords. Objections rose and fell like cannon fire. The judge's gavel struck again and again, calling order as tempers flared. My family sat frozen, their faces pale. For the first time, they were forced to watch me not as the forgotten child, but as the woman standing at the center of the storm, commanding it. Secrets bled into the open. My father's trust in his cousin was revealed as negligence. My brother's careless dismissal of documents came to light. My sister's attempt to sign a paper without reading it was exposed. Each revelation was another stone pulled from the facade they had built around themselves. And at the heart of it all was me, the one they had ignored, now holding the threads that unraveled their lies. By the end of the day, the cousin's lawyer looked weary. His client looked broken. The judge announced that the case would continue with a final review of evidence in the next session. No verdict yet, but the air had shifted. The cousin's confidence had crumbled, and the community that once whispered against me now whispered for me. As we left the courtroom, flashes from cameras caught our faces. Reporters murmured questions. Neighbors leaned in for scraps of gossip. My father walked beside me in silence, his head lowered. My mother clutched her rosary tighter. My siblings trailed behind, but the eyes of the crowd were not on them. They were on me. That night, I sat by my window again, the city lights flickering in the distance. I thought of the courtroom firestorm, of the lies I had torn apart, of the faces that had finally turned toward me. I thought of the years of silence, the birthdays forgotten, the tears ignored. This was not just about land. This was about every moment I had been made invisible. And now, I was seen. The firestorm had only begun. The next session would bring the verdict, but I already knew one thing. No matter what the court decided, my revenge was complete in one undeniable way. They could never dismiss me again. They did not come with apologies at first. They came with softness. My mother began leaving tea outside my door, steam rising like a ribbon, sugar stirred just the way I prefer. She asked about my sleep as if she had counted my breaths in the night. My father started using my name in full, slow and careful, as if the shape of it in his mouth could stitch old wounds. My brother offered rides and laughed too loudly at small jokes. My sister sent long messages filled with memories selected for warmth, cut free from the cold that lived around them. I knew what was happening. The hearing had shaken them. The neighbors' photographs had landed like stones on a glass table. The cousin's smile had cracked. My family saw the public tide turn and they panicked. They reached for me not because love led them, but because need did. It was tempting to take the softness and call it change. Temptation is clever when it wears old faces. They asked me to sit at dinner. The table was set like a show, fresh flowers in the center. My father asked about my day and waited for the answer, as if patience had always been his habit. My mother served me first. My brother kept my glass full. My sister asked about my plans for the next hearing and tried to braid her questions with praise. They did not understand that praise has weight when it comes from people who saw you before they needed you. From them, it felt like paper held up against a storm. They wanted me to speak about strategy so they could feel safe again. I gave them nothing beyond the schedule. I thanked my mother for the tea and spoke about the weather. I kept my voice even. A boundary can be polite and still be a boundary. At one point my father touched my hand in a gesture that might have moved me in another life. I did not pull away. I did not lean in. I let the hand rest for a second and then I reached for the salt. The next day, my mother appeared in my room with a box of old photographs. She placed them on the bed and began to narrate our history as if my absence had never been written into those years. She lingered on a picture of me in a school uniform, hair tied back, shy smile. She said I had always been a good child, always helpful, always steady. She looked at me with eyes that begged to be believed. I looked back and saw a woman terrified of losing the roof over her head and the story that kept her from facing herself. Tears came easily to her. They slid down and softened every sentence. Tears can wash facts from the surface if you allow them to. I let her cry. I handed her a tissue. I did not let the tears carry me away from what I knew. When she asked if we could put the court matter aside to protect the family name, I asked her if she would say the same thing if the papers had been honest. She could not answer. The truth sat between us like a heavy book no one wanted to open. My brother took a different path. He tried charm. He told me stories about his mistakes and framed them as proof that he had grown. He called me wise and told me he had always admired my calm. He even admitted to dismissing me in the past. He said it like a confession designed to earn a quick pardon. I watched him try to climb out of the hole with compliments instead of effort. I told him he could start by reading every document he ever signed and by respecting the work done in silence. He nodded and changed the subject to music. My sister chose guilt. She said neighbors were talking. She said people were saying I had taken the family to court. I reminded her that I had not filed the claim. I had objected to a theft. She said women are judged harshly when they challenge men in public. She said this would make marriage harder, friendships harder, life harder. She wanted me to accept a quiet loss for an easier future. I asked her if my future mattered when they ignored me. She did not answer. Her silence was not the silence that had once caged me. It was the silence of someone meeting a boundary and finding it solid. The calls began to arrive at night. An aunt who never remembered my birthday remembered my number. An uncle who had treated me like a coat rack at weddings asked to meet for tea. They spoke with sorrow and used phrases that tried to hold me in place. They said family is everything. They said elders must be respected. They said peace is better than truth. I asked them if they would lay their home at the feet of a lie to keep the street quiet. Their answers drifted into vagueness. The next hearing loomed, and with it the stakes rose. My father tried a new tactic. He asked me to trust him and drop the photographs. He said men could handle these matters among themselves. He promised that the cousin would adjust the line if we stopped pushing. I asked him to write that promise and to put it under oath. He grew angry. He said I was being ungrateful. There it was, the old mask sliding back over the face I had been watching. When affection fails, accusation steps in. I let him speak. I gave him no fuel. Anger burns out faster when it does not find dry wood. I turned their tactics back with simple rules that never changed. I refused to argue late at night. I refused to explain my plan twice. I refused to accept last-minute changes unless they were written and reviewed. When they tried to rush me, I slowed down. When they tried to drown me in emotion, I returned to facts. When they tried to corner me with guilt, I stood in the open and let the guilt fall to the floor. The cousin's camp tried flattery too. His lawyer contacted my lawyer with a message made of honey. A settlement that looked generous on the surface but hid a sting in the tail. A small payment now in exchange for a quiet signature that would give away more than it protected. My lawyer and I read it in silence. We circled the hidden barbs and wrote a reply that cut them away. We asked for a correction on record, a permanent record of the true line, and the fees returned. The offer vanished like smoke. On the morning before the next hearing, My mother asked me to pray with her. I sat beside her because I respect the part of her that tries. I watched her lips move and wondered when faith became a shield against responsibility in this house. After the prayer she tried again, with softness sharpened by fear. She asked me to think of her health, of my father's age, of the shame of court. I told her shame belongs to the one who lies, not to the one who resists. She closed her eyes. She understood. Even if she did not like the shape of it, I did feel the pull. I felt it in the quiet moments when the house settled and the old ache rose like a bruise under the skin. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to accept a tender voice as a sign of change. But I had trained myself to look beyond sound to structure. Change has a shape. It shows up in action repeated without an audience. It does not arrive as a monologue when a verdict approaches. So I set tests. They were simple. Read what you sign. Show up on time. Keep records. Speak truth even when it makes you look small. I watched them meet these tests for one day and fail them on the next. Manipulation cannot hold posture for long. It bends back to comfort as soon as eyes turn away. When the cousin tried to call me directly, I let it ring until the line went quiet. He sent a message that dressed greed as forgiveness. He said he did not want to fight family. He said he wanted peace. He offered a number and a smiley face as if this were a market bargain. I replied with a single sentence. The boundary is not for sale. He did not write again. The night before the hearing, I took the file from my desk and placed it in my bag. I checked each page. I rehearsed my answers only once. I wrote 2 lines on a small card and slid it into my pocket. The first line was the vow I had made when the fever burned and the phone went dead. The second line was new. Do not trade truth for applause. I had learned that applause can be a form of control, as blinding as insult. At breakfast my father tried one last time. He asked me to skip the hearing and let him handle it. He promised me peace. I looked at him and saw a man who could not face the cost of his trust without trying to pass the bill to his daughter. I told him I would see him in court. He looked away first. Walking out the door, I did not feel cruel. I felt clear. Their tears had tried to blur the words on the page. Their praise had tried to wrap itself around my throat. Their guilt had tried to turn me against myself. I had taken each tool from their hands by refusing to use it on me. I had turned them back by standing still and speaking plain. They wanted the old me, the girl who made peace at her own expense. That girl had learned the weight of evidence and the taste of resolve. She now stood where they had never expected her to stand, at the doorway, with the file in her hand, immune to tricks that had once worked, ready to turn need into consequence. The storm that had begun in court was only the surface. Beneath it lay years of secrets waiting to claw their way into the light. I had thought the property dispute was the battle. I was wrong. It was only the doorway. Once opened, it exposed a house built on lies, each one stacked so carefully that only a patient eye could see the cracks. The first secret came by accident. I was reviewing an old bank statement, cross-checking figures for our case, when a withdrawal caught my eye. The date stretched back nearly 10 years. The amount was large enough to matter, small enough to hide. The account had been in my father's name, but the withdrawal slip bore my brother's signature. At the time, he had been a student with no right to touch that account. The money had vanished into thin air. I remembered those years too well. My college books denied, my requests dismissed for lack of funds. Now I saw the truth. While I sat copying notes from borrowed texts, my brother had siphoned money from the very account that was supposed to support us. I took the statement to my lawyer. She raised an eyebrow and asked if I wanted this in the case. I nodded without hesitation. My father tried to explain it away when I confronted him. He said my brother had needed a little help. He said it was a family matter, nothing to drag into the open. I told him he had dragged it into the open when he chose silence over fairness. The second secret came in whispers. A former employee of my cousin reached out to me, a man bitter from years of unpaid wages. He told me my cousin had been altering land documents for years, shifting boundary lines 1 inch at a time, each time in his favor. Families too tired to fight, too poor to hire a lawyer, had given up their land piece by piece. My family's case was not the first. It was simply the first with someone willing to fight back. I asked the man why he never spoke before. He said people are afraid of men with influence. I told him fear only works until someone refuses to carry it. The third betrayal cut deepest. I found letters my aunt had written to neighbors about me. In them, she described me as unstable, prone to outbursts, unreliable. She told people I could not be trusted with money or responsibility. She painted me as a burden to justify why the family had overlooked me. Reading those words was like pressing glass into my own skin. I remembered the times people looked at me strangely at weddings, the way their smiles faltered when I approached. I thought it was shyness. It was the shadow of lies told behind my back. I carried the letters into the courtroom as evidence not of land, but of character assassination. My lawyer used them to show the judge how deeply deceit ran in this conflict. It was not simply about property, it was about reputation, about silencing the one person who had the patience to notice what others ignored. The cousin's lawyer tried to dismiss the letters as gossip, but gossip written, signed, and sealed is no longer gossip. It is testimony. With each secret uncovered, my family shrank further into themselves. My brother stopped meeting my eyes. My sister wept in corners, begging me to stop digging. My father walked through the house like a man aging 10 years in 10 days. My mother prayed louder, her rosary beads clutched like a lifeline. But I did not stop. I could not stop. To halt halfway would mean carrying their lies for another lifetime. The day came when the cousin was forced to testify again. This time, my lawyer did not waste words. She placed the bank statements, the witness accounts, the letters, and the altered deeds in front of him, one after another. His denials faltered under the weight of paper. His lawyer objected again and again, but objections cannot erase ink. At one point, the cousin snapped. He accused me of betrayal, his voice loud enough to rattle the benches. He shouted that I had turned the family against itself, that I had dragged private matters into the public eye. I looked him in the face and said, I did not betray the family. I exposed the betrayal already there. The room went silent. Even the judge's pen paused in his hand. It was then that the final secret slid into the open like a blade drawn from a sheath. During cross-examination, my cousin's own witness, a clerk from the land office, admitted that documents had been falsified at his request. The cousin had bribed him with promises of business. The clerk confessed, his voice trembling, his eyes darting away from the crowd. The cousin's lawyer buried his head in his hands. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. That confession was the moment the web collapsed. Every thread I had pulled now converged. Money stolen, property manipulated, lies told to erase me, it all lay bare in front of strangers, no longer protected by family silence. When the session ended, I walked out of the courthouse with my file in hand, the reporters shouting questions I ignored. Behind me, my family stumbled in silence, their eyes hollow. They had lived for years believing secrets could be buried in silence. But silence, once broken, is the loudest voice in the room. That night, I sat alone in my room, the documents spread before me like a battlefield map. I thought of the girl who once begged for medicine, who once placed a certificate on a table only to be ignored. I thought of the years of loneliness and the nights spent whispering vows into the dark. Every betrayal uncovered was proof that my pain had not been madness, that the ache had not been imagined. They had wronged me, and they had been wrong all along. For the first time, I felt not just anger, but release. I no longer carried their lies inside me. They carried them themselves now, visible for the world to see. The case was not over, but the war had changed. I was no longer fighting to be seen. I was fighting to prove what I had always known, that truth, once revealed, does not need to shout. It simply stands, and everything built on lies crumbles around it. And as I folded the documents back into my file, I whispered the vow once more, not as anger this time, but as a promise fulfilled. They will regret dismissing me. The courtroom was only half the war. Outside its walls, the battle seeped into every corner of my life, creeping into moments that should have been ordinary. It was no longer just about land or papers. It became about power, intimidation, and the games people play when truth strips them of control. It began with whispers. At first they floated in the market, in the mosque courtyard, in the tea stalls where neighbors gathered. I felt their eyes on me before I heard the words. They said I had turned against my blood. They said I had been poisoned by greed. They said I was being used by outsiders, that a woman could never fight such a battle on her own. My name was passed around like a rumor that belonged to everyone but me. At home, the whispers turned sharper. My sister wept and accused me of tearing the family apart. My brother grew cold, his charm replaced by resentment. My mother's prayers grew louder, as if God could be bargained with through volume. My father avoided my eyes, shrinking into himself, his silence a form of punishment. Each day felt like living in a house with walls that judged me. Then came the threats. Anonymous letters slid under the door, scribbled in a hand too hurried to disguise anger. They warned me to stop, to withdraw the case, to remember that women who fight men in public are punished. Phone calls arrived late at night, the line crackling with voices that promised shame, promised isolation, promised pain. I reported them to my lawyer, who told me they were predictable tactics. But knowing they were predictable did not stop the chill that crawled through me each time the phone rang. Walking the streets became an act of defiance. Neighbors who once ignored me now stared as if I carried a weapon under my shawl. Some looked at me with admiration, others with suspicion. Shopkeepers asked about the case in tones too casual to be innocent. Even children whispered my name, their parents tugging them away as if I carried contagion. I had become both spectacle and warning. The psychological traps were the cruelest. My family oscillated between affection and attack. Some days my mother brought me food and begged me to stop fighting. Other days she accused me of killing my father with stress. My brother called me stubborn one moment and courageous the next, trying to confuse me into thinking he was an ally. My sister alternated between tears and silence, both designed to draw guilt from me. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the weight of loneliness pressing down like a stone. I questioned myself. Was I cruel? Was I ungrateful? Had my anger blinded me? The memories of their neglect twisted against me, turning my own pain into a weapon they could use. Fear whispered that I was walking into a war I could not win, that the cost of victory would be too high, that revenge would leave me hollow. But then I remembered. I remembered the fever that burned while no one came. I remembered the essay certificate folded in a drawer because no one cared. I remembered the nights I whispered vows into the darkness, promising myself I would not remain invisible forever. Those memories anchored me when manipulation tried to sweep me away. I began to fight the war inside myself with the same discipline I fought it in court. I wrote my doubts on paper and tore them up, refusing to let them live in me. I practiced speaking in the mirror, steady and calm, so no lawyer could shake my voice again. I walked through the market with my head high, even when my stomach knotted with fear. I refused to let them see me bend. The cousins' camp escalated. They hired men to follow me discreetly, shadows lingering at the end of streets, eyes watching from parked motorcycles. I learned to change my route home, to walk with others, to stay alert. My lawyer warned me that intimidation was their last weapon, but warnings do not erase fear. Each step in the dark felt like a choice between courage and collapse. One night, returning from the office, I found the gate of our house marked with black paint, crude words scrawled across it. Traitor. My mother screamed when she saw it. My father ordered me to drop the case. My siblings accused me of bringing shame to the doorstep. I stood before the gate, staring at the word, and felt the old fear rise. But beneath it was something else, fury. They wanted me to carry their label, to shrink under it. Instead, I scrubbed it clean with my own hands, each stroke a declaration. If they wanted me silent, they would fail again. The war crept into my dreams. I saw courtrooms collapse into fire, saw my cousin's face twist into 100 mocking versions, saw myself screaming with no sound coming out. I woke drenched in sweat, my fists clenched. Sleep offered no escape, but it offered a lesson. Fear would find me even in rest, so I had to master it while awake. Slowly, I began to rise above their traps. I stopped reacting to the swings of affection and anger in my house. When my mother wept, I offered her tissues but not promises. When my brother mocked me, I met him with silence sharper than words. When my sister accused me, I asked her to bring evidence the way I did. My calm became their frustration. They could not move me with tears, nor shame me with silence. I built small rituals of strength. Every morning I walked to the courthouse steps, even if I had no hearing that day, and stood there for a few minutes, reminding myself of my ground. I kept the vow I had written years ago tucked in my bag, reading it whenever doubt pressed too hard. I met with women in the community who had fought their own battles, listening to their stories of survival, drawing from their courage. I discovered that rising above fear is not the absence of it, it is the decision to act despite it. One afternoon, I overheard two neighbors speaking in low voices. They said the cousin was losing grip, that his lies were bleeding into the open, that his name carried less weight each week. They spoke of me not as a traitor, but as a fighter. It was the first time I realized that the whispers could change direction. That truth, once planted, grows roots stronger than rumor. The psychological war did not end overnight. Threats still arrived. Whispers still clung to me. My family still shifted between affection and attack. But something had changed inside me. Fear no longer dictated my steps. Doubt no longer silenced me. Guilt no longer bent me. I had become a fortress, not because I felt no pain, but because I refused to let pain decide my path. The day came when the cousins' men stopped following me. The letters stopped arriving. The whispers softened. It was not kindness that silenced them, it was exhaustion. You cannot intimidate someone who refuses to be intimidated. You cannot shame someone who has embraced the truth of their scars. You cannot break someone who has already rebuilt herself from neglect. By the time the next court date approached, I was no longer just the girl who uncovered documents. I was the woman who survived the shadows, who rose above traps, who faced the war not only in public but in private. The cousin had tried to defeat me with lies, then with manipulation, then with fear. He had failed in every language, and as I stood before the courthouse again, head high, file in hand, I understood something profound. Revenge is not only in the verdict. Revenge is also in the survival, in the refusal to be erased, in the quiet power of standing unbroken when the whole world expects you to fall. The fire of conflict had burned me, but from its ashes something stronger began to emerge. By the time the next hearings were announced, the atmosphere had shifted. I no longer walked into the courthouse as the girl who had once begged to be heard. I entered as a force that even my enemies could not deny. The first sign of the turning tide came not in court, but in the community. People who had whispered against me began approaching in hushed tones. A shopkeeper pressed an extra packet of tea into my hand and muttered that he respected what I was doing. A neighbor who had once avoided my eyes now nodded at me with quiet admiration. The same mouths that had spread rumors began to spread respect. It was not universal, but it was enough. In the courtroom, the cousin's confidence waned. His lawyer's voice carried less certainty, his arguments weighed down by the confessions already on record. Each time he tried to paint me as ungrateful or greedy, my lawyer countered with proof. Each time he tried to lean on loyalty, I countered with betrayal. The balance of power shifted in ways too subtle to mark with a single moment, yet unmistakable in their accumulation. Then came the allies. Some were expected, others not. The old neighbor who had testified returned with more photographs, documents she had unearthed in dusty albums. A retired clerk from the land office stepped forward, tired of carrying the cousin's lies. He provided records that confirmed years of manipulation. Even relatives who had once sided against me began to distance themselves from the cousin, unwilling to sync with him. At home, the transformation was quieter but no less significant. My family still swayed between guilt and denial, but they began to defer to me in matters of law. My father asked my opinion before speaking to the lawyer. My brother no longer mocked my silence. Instead, he asked about documents with hesitant respect. My mother's prayers included my name spoken not as a plea, but as a shield. My sister watched me with wide eyes, as if she were seeing me for the first time. And I, within myself, felt the shift most strongly. The fear that once clung to me began to loosen its grip. I no longer avoided the stares of neighbors. I walked through the market with my head high, the file under my arm like a badge of resilience. I slept more soundly, my dreams no longer filled with faceless threats but with visions of resolution. It was not only in court that I was winning. In life, doors opened that had long been closed. The local women's group invited me to speak about courage, about fighting for what is right. At first I hesitated, me, the girl who had once been too timid to raise her voice at the dinner table. But when I stood before them, words flowed as if they had waited years for release. I spoke not only of betrayal, but of endurance, of the strength found in silence, of the power of patience. Their eyes glistened, their heads nodded, and for the first time in my life, I felt not invisible but amplified. Opportunities followed. A journalist asked to interview me, wanting to highlight how an ordinary woman stood against corruption. I declined at first, wary of exposure, but later, I realized my story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to every woman who had been silenced, every person dismissed in their own home. I spoke carefully, without embellishment, and when the article appeared, people stopped me in the street not to whisper, but to applaud. Inside, I changed as well. The bitterness that had once fueled me softened into something steadier. I no longer sought revenge for its own sake. I sought justice, not only to punish betrayal, but to restore what had been stolen. The vow I had once whispered in anger transformed into a declaration of self-worth. They will regret dismissing me, yes, but more importantly, I will never dismiss myself again. The cousin sensed the shift too. He began sending mediators, men with polite smiles who spoke of compromise. Their offers grew more desperate each week, numbers rising, promises multiplying. Each time, I refused. I did not want his money. I wanted the truth recorded where no lie could erase it. In the final weeks before the judgment, the cousin himself approached me outside the courthouse. His face was thinner, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. He spoke softly, calling me sister, calling me blood, begging me to end it. He promised land, wealth, even public apology. For a moment, the girl in me, The one who had longed for acknowledgement, felt the pull. But then I remembered the nights of fever, the certificate dismissed, the lies written in letters. I looked him in the eye and said, "You had years to be my family. Now you are only my opponent." His face hardened. He walked away without a word. By then, even my own family began to see the truth. My father sat with me late into the night, his voice breaking as he admitted his failures. He confessed that he had chosen loyalty to his cousin over loyalty to me, and he could not undo the damage. My mother wept at the table, telling me she wished she had listened sooner. My brother apologized in awkward fragments, unable to find the language for guilt. My sister clung to me, saying she wanted to be more like me. Their remorse did not erase the past, but it marked a beginning. For once, I was not invisible in my own home. The tide had turned. Not completely, not perfectly, but undeniably. The war was not over, but I was no longer fighting alone. I had allies, I had respect, I had strength that came not from their validation but from within. And as I prepared for the final stages of the battle, I knew one thing with certainty: whatever the outcome in court, I had already won in life. I had transformed from the forgotten child into the woman who could not be ignored. The courtroom filled with a low hum that felt like an animal waiting to be named. People shifted in their seats, papers rustled, and the judge read the final lines with a calm that made every word heavier. I had rehearsed responses, imagined the moment in 100 variations, but nothing prepared me for the precise weight of legal language when it lands like a verdict. When the judge announced that the altered deeds were null and void, the sound of it entered my chest before it reached my ears. He ordered the record corrected to reflect the original boundary, required restitution for unpaid wages tied to the cousin's schemes, and placed a restraint on any further transfers until the district office completed an audit. He did not paint the cousin as a villain with flourish. He stated facts, one after another, and the law did the work of exposure. My cousin's face lost color in a way that could not be faked. He tried to smile and it fell away. His lawyer leaned close and whispered something, but the judge's words had already cut the air. The room exhaled. Neighbors who had watched from porches watched now with eyes that held a new recognition. Reporters scribbled, their pens a hurried chorus. I felt my father's hand find mine, small and trembling. He squeezed it like a man trying to steady a bridge he had helped weaken. My mother sat with her hands clenched around her rosary. My brother's jaw worked. My sister's face was an open question. They had stood beside me in the courtroom more out of necessity than conviction, but in that moment they could not hide the shape of relief and shame mixing in their faces. The cousin rose slowly. He tried to argue, to appeal to nuance, to offer apologies that sounded like rehearsed lines. The judge did not rise to his performance. He reminded everyone that the law is blind to sentiment when evidence is clear. The cousin's options narrowed to appeals, delays, and the slow collapse that legal consequence brings when public trust fails. Outside the courtroom, people waited under umbrellas and in sun, near the courthouse steps that had become a stage for small dramas. When we stepped into the light, cameras found us. A reporter asked how I felt. My voice did not tremble. I said only what was true, that I had wanted the record to reflect the truth, that I had wanted the theft undone, and that I had not come to court seeking vengeance for its own sake. The question that followed was whether I forgave. I answered that forgiveness was not mine to grant casually. It would come only if their actions matched their words. News spread faster than I expected. The local paper ran the story with a headline that made my stomach tighten. People I had known only by face reached out with messages of support. Women stopped me at the market and told me how my resolve inspired them. Men I had once seen as indifferent now nodded when we passed. The public shift was a double edge. Validation wrapped in the exposure that had cost my family dearly. At home, the atmosphere changed in strange ways. Some neighbors avoided our street, not out of scorn but to protect themselves from gossip. Stores that once overlooked my requests now greeted me with a cautionary respect. My father found old receipts and produced them with shaking hands, trying to explain missteps in numbers that had once made sense to him. He admitted mistakes without dramatics, the way a tired man lists broken tools. He said that loyalty can blind and that he had learned the hard way where trust should have met proof. My mother sought me out late that night. She did not bring tea or photographs. She brought silence first, then words that were thin with regret. She said she had been afraid of conflict, of losing standing in a neighborhood that valued appearance. She said she had not known how to argue with men who spoke loudly. She said she was sorry. Her apology was simple and small, and that was its truth. I accepted it without performing absolution. I placed a hand on her shoulder and said that change requires truth and work, not only words. My brother's apology arrived in fragments. He spoke about nights when money was tight and choices ugly. He said he had been foolish and selfish. His shame was new and real. I listened and told him that apologies matter only when they lead to action. He promised to learn the paperwork, to ask questions, to be accountable. I did not demand a saint. I asked for consistency. My sister's eyes held a softness that had not been there before. She said she had always feared being wrong publicly, and so she followed a safer path of silence. She said she wanted to stand with me when the house needed truth over comfort. Her change was tentative, but it kept a door open. The cousin's empire did not collapse in a single night. Legal consequences unfold with the patience of bureaucracy. He faced fines, challenges to his business deals, and a trust that eroded as records showed patterns of manipulation. People walked away from projects linked to him. Men who once smiled at his jokes now left the room when he entered. The social cost mounted like unpaid debt. I did not feel triumphant in a way that matched the noise around me. The victory tasted like iron and rain, clean and bitter. I had sought recognition, truth, and an end to the theft. Those arrived. What did not arrive was a neat restoration of the years taken from me. I could not recover a childhood that had been ignored, the small humiliations that had braided into my life. Those losses leave marks that paperwork cannot erase. Yet something else shifted beneath the marks. People who had treated me as a tool found they could not relegate me to that role. My voice gained weight without my asking for it. When I spoke about money or documents, people listened. When I entered a room, fewer heads turned away. That change opened doors. An offer to consult on a community land record project, an invitation to speak at a women's legal clinic, and a job inquiry from an organization that needed someone who understood bureaucracy and grit. They offered payment and purpose. I accepted one role: to help others check their titles and records, to teach neighbors how to document and to keep receipts. It was a small way to make the fight matter beyond the courtroom. The work gave me a steadiness that balanced the sharpness of the ordeal. It gave me a purpose that was not revenge but repair. There were moments when I wondered if I had hardened into someone I did not recognize. I caught myself speaking plainly at a family dinner, setting rules for how we would move forward. My father nodded. My mother wept quietly. They listened. The silence that had once been my cell was now a space of negotiation. We were building something fragile and new. It would require patience, honesty, and, above all, proof. At night I returned to the little card I had kept in my pocket for years. I read the lines I had written in a whisper. They will regret dismissing me. Do not trade truth for applause. The words still fit my hands. I had won the case. But the deeper change had been inside me. I had moved from survival to ownership of my life. The cost was not small, but the outcome was not empty. The cousin appealed. He hired new lawyers, bought time, and tried to muddy the records once more. The process would continue, perhaps for months, maybe years. I prepared for that fact by building systems around me: better record keeping, community support, legal counsel committed to the cause. I had become someone who expected resistance and planned for it. When I thought about revenge now, it felt different. Revenge had been the fuel that kept me moving through bitterness and fear. It had been a harness for my anger and a compass for my actions. With the verdict in place and the records corrected, revenge had transformed into something steadier. Accountability. The law had done its part. My work had only begun. I stood on the balcony that evening, the neighborhood quiet in a way that felt new, and listened to the distant calls of vendors closing shops. I thought of the years I had been ignored and of the way the world had tilted because I chose to speak. I thought of the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. The courtroom had been a stage for a critical battle, but the life that followed would be the true measure of what I built from the ruins. Victory is a word people love to use because it sounds complete, like a door shut with finality. But I learned that real victory does not sound like a slam. It sounds like silence after years of noise. It feels less like triumph and more like exhaustion that settles in your bones. When the court confirmed the verdict in my favor and the cousin's empire began to fold, people congratulated me as if I had climbed a mountain and planted a flag. But standing on that peak, I did not feel the rush I expected. I felt the thin air, the loneliness of being above but apart. Yes, I had won. The land was safe. The lies were exposed. The cousin's reputation lay in ruins. My family, who had once ignored me, now looked at me with reverence they should have offered long ago. Yet even as I held the proof of victory in my hands, I could not ignore the truth that something inside me had been carved away in the process. Revenge, I discovered, gives back pieces of the world but takes pieces of the self. The cost was not just sleepless nights or the endless weight of evidence. The cost was the part of me that once believed love could be unconditional. I had wanted them to see me, to hear me, to choose me without a fight. Instead, I forced them with facts, with court orders, with public exposure. And once they did see me, it was not the tender recognition of family, it was the wary respect of people who had been defeated. That difference marked me deeply. I thought of the girl who had once placed a certificate on the kitchen table, hoping for pride, and received only indifference. That girl wanted affection. The woman I became demanded accountability, and while accountability sustained me, it did not warm me. The hug I longed for, the acknowledgement whispered without conditions, never came. What I received instead was compliance, nods, and apologies threaded with guilt. It was something, but it was not what I had once dreamed of. I also lost pieces of my innocence. Before the fight, I believed silence was a shield. I believed patience was virtue. Now I knew silence could be a weapon and patience could be a trap. I no longer trusted easily. Every smile carried a question mark. Every promise felt like a clause waiting to betray me. My mind, once content to drift, now dissected everything with sharp suspicion. That vigilance kept me safe, but it also kept me distant. And then there was the family itself. My father looked at me with regret so heavy it bent his shoulders. My mother cried often, her rosary beads clicking like bones. My brother stumbled through apologies. My sister hovered with hesitant admiration. We shared meals again, but the laughter was fragile. The trust had cracked, and cracks do not vanish. They remain like scars in wood, even when polished. I had wanted to restore what was broken, but revenge does not restore. It rebuilds differently, with edges that never existed before. Some nights I asked myself if I had become like the cousin I fought. He manipulated papers. I manipulated silence into leverage. He used deception. I used truth as a blade. He wanted power. I too had craved power, and not for land, but for recognition. Was I better than him because my cause was just? Or had I allowed the fight to harden me in ways I could not undo? The public saw me as a symbol. Women came to me with their stories. Men nodded with respect. Journalists wrote about resilience. They called me brave. They called me relentless. They did not call me lonely, though I was. They did not call me weary, though I was. They saw only the surface. A woman who had brought down corruption. They did not see the quiet after the battle, the emptiness that followed a purpose fulfilled. Because here was the truth. Revenge gives you fuel. It keeps you moving, sharp and determined. But once it is complete, once the enemy falls and the papers are signed, the fuel runs out. I woke some mornings unsure of what to do without the fight. My identity had been forged in resistance, in being overlooked and then striking back. Who was I when the war was over? Yet even in that emptiness, I found small sparks. Helping neighbors check their land records, teaching them how to keep receipts, became a new kind of purpose. Speaking to women who had been silenced reminded me that my story was not only mine. The cost of revenge was real, but the lessons I carried could become gifts for others. Perhaps that was the redemption hidden inside the ruin. I had gained power, yes, power to speak, to be heard, to demand respect. But power does not heal old wounds. It only keeps them from being ignored. Healing, I realized, would not come from verdicts or applause. It would come slowly, in choosing to live without needing validation from those who once denied me. It would come in forgiving, not them, not yet, but forgiving myself for carrying their neglect like a scar across my heart. I stood one evening on the same balcony where I had once whispered vows into the night. The air was still, the city lights flickered, and the quiet was mine. I whispered a new vow, softer than the ones before. I will not let revenge be the only story I tell about myself. It was not about erasing what had happened. It was about opening space for something more. The cost of revenge was high. I lost the girl who dreamed of unconditional love. I lost the innocence that once trusted silence. I lost parts of my family that will never fully return. But I gained the strength to stand alone, the courage to demand truth, and the clarity to know my worth without waiting for their approval. Victory was not the end of the story, it was the turning of a page. And as I closed the file, locked the documents away, and faced the mirror, I saw not only the woman who had fought and won, but the woman who had survived the cost. And that, I decided, was enough. If this story moved you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life.